So, story for me begins from home. I'm the first of three. I'm a dad's girl. What I recall growing up was just adventure. I don't recall ever being stopped. So, as curious and energetic and inquisitive, there was never a discussion around stop.
If you could describe yourself in 5 words, what words would you use?
Energetic, serious, impatient, fun, daring. Can we start? Action. When I look back at my career, I've been in mostly jobs that have been male oriented. So even in investment banking, when I chose, they have sectors. So there's real estate, there's hospitality, there's pharmaceutical, healthcare, etc. I picked utilities, meaning electric and gas utilities, which meant when we were making decisions on who we were going to lend money to, I had to go tour electric power plants and wearing hard hats. And I was often the only woman with heels and trying to figure out how to catch up when my colleagues had, their shoes and suits and could easily remove their jacket. But when you're wearing a dress and you're climbing upstairs, not as easy. So again, that was a different path. Consultant, a lot of travel. You spent a lot of your time on the plane. I had 2 kids as a consultant. I barely did, I think I worked the last day, and after maternity leave, I went right back and I was back on the road, traveling far places. Again, not that there weren't both male and female, but they're generally careers that require you to hunker down, regardless of what else is going on. And so when I think back, and also even when it comes to dressing and how you behave and how you speak, and everybody conforms to a certain way, because when you're in investment banking, you conform. You're either always suited up, you have your pocket square, there's certain expectations on how to behave. Same thing in consulting. When you've done that for 10 years, or you sort of pick some of those things up, and they're still with me, all good lessons. But I think somewhere in the last couple of years, and maybe when I started having children, or maybe actually as the kids grew. And when you're telling your kids and you want them to be content with themselves and be happy with themselves, you're almost saying to yourself, have you really been authentic with yourself? And I think it really dawned on me maybe the last 2-3 years, because now my children are teenagers, and at teenagers is where there's a lot more peer pressure. There's a lot more you should behave this way or that way. And I think it now dawned on me that, all your decisions have been made in a certain way. You're very dogged about certain decisions and getting things done. And I do feel like I've done a lot of conforming. And I've said to myself these days that I want to do less of that and I want to be me. And what's interesting is the moment I'm myself, people say a whole lot other things about me, like, wow. And I'm like, oh my, so then why was I stealing my shine from myself? I would just say be you and fully embrace 100% of you. And if you choose not to, there are times when you might decide to put it aside. Be conscious that it is you that is agreeing to do that and not somebody else asking you to do that.
If you were not a banker, what would you be?
A biker chick.
A biker chick. Ooh, love it. Do you write?
No, I don't. I wish in my dreams.
In your dreams?
In my dreams.
Okay.
Every time I see movies and I see, these biker chicks, my
Do you like
butterflies. I'm like,
Jolie?
yes.
Yeah.
Actually, I do.
Yeah.
So I remember when I started at the bank and I was always working, I worked late. Again, a trait that I picked up from investment banking. So I could work till 3 a.m. and not notice. I'm not a morning person generally, but I would work. I would keep working. And I think it's a perfectionist in me. If I want to get something done, I'll get it done. But I always had energy. I was always busting through the hallways, stomping, marching from one meeting to the other. And interestingly enough, a colleague comes back to me and says, the rumor has it that, no, not rumor, that who will marry this woman because she has too much energy, she works too hard, etc., etc. And The interesting thing is I've been married almost 10 years. I had 2 kids. What they couldn't understand is that you could love your job and do what you need to do, but it doesn't mean it comes at the compromise of everything else that is non-work. Now, I feel that most times the people who get that a lot are women, because I think a lot of times they expect that you should be trying to go home by 5 o'clock. Sometimes I'm the last person to leave the office. The conversations were, who will marry her? Well, thankfully, I met the husband who knows me and accepted me for who I was. But it just was amazing that even today, when people see me, they're like, oh, she has 2 kids, she's married, how? And not that that is something to be proud of or aspire, because sometimes people feel like that's a checklist, but I feel like that's because the society has an expectation of corporate women and how they work and what they do. So that's one. Second thing is, and I think now it's less the case, but if you saw me in the office place because you had to wear a suit or, look professional, as we have to, like, say you're going to church or the mosque, there's certain things you can wear and certain things you can't. So if someone ever bumped into me at a supermarket or a grocery store, oftentimes they were very confused. And part of it is either because they see me with black lipstick or there's something else that they seem to think is out of, etc. Now those lives are coming more in tune. But I think that's something that if people said, oh, are you eclectic or how eccentric or etc., I think that's something that maybe sometimes surprises people. My choice of music surprises people a lot. But again, it's a stereotype. I think for those who may have followed my path or grew up in a household where my father was a lover of music, my mother, same thing, and we listened to different genres of music without criticism, even if it included curse words, I think they seem surprised a lot of times. People are surprised that I'm not on social media sometimes. I think a lot of times people always find out that, because all you see is professional, she must have no life outside of professional. And so I think sometimes people are surprised when they see me in a different setting and have a hard time being able to reconcile between both. Otherwise, it's either you don't have kids, either you're a workaholic or you're a bookaholic, and therefore you don't have another side of you. And then occasionally, for those that will see me outside, I have a number of tattoos. So that's the one thing that I think gets people pretty surprised. How is it that she can be like this? And then on the other end, she has a number of tattoos and counting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, I'm the only girl, first child. Never had any conversation about girls only do this and boys only do that. So interestingly enough, when I have conversations today and I'm into cars or I'm into certain types of sports, etc., and then not that things should be gender biased, but I do have friends who maybe did not do certain things because they were told otherwise. I didn't have those conversations. I grew up as a tomboy. I wore baggy jeans and Tommy Hilfiger shirts at the time, to the detriment of to my mother. But I think my story is one where if I try something and I'm good at it or I like it, then I keep going. I didn't have anyone telling me stop. Maybe the world would say that in its own voice, but I'm not sure that it necessarily deterred me from doing what I set out to do. And I believe it's the same. So when I think about journey through primary school to secondary school, it was very clear I didn't like things like English or literature, and I didn't bother. I was very clear to say I'm not doing literature. I like things like physics and further math and chemistry. I did not like biology. So very early on, I knew I liked certain things and it had to be cut and dry. So in math and physics, you can, you know what the formula is. You either know that something is blue or green in blue or red in a litmus test. But I didn't like so much talk. So it was very clear that I was either going this direction or that. And sometimes that's a good thing. I've learned later on that sometimes not always great in decision making, right? So you kind of know what your strengths are. My story has been really one that if I set my head to do something, I often able to achieve. Doesn't mean that the things don't happen along the way, but somehow I think mental strength and being able to tell myself that I can do it. And even if I don't end up doing it, I don't think I've ever really beat myself down around not doing it. It just means along the way, I may have found something else that I'm better at. And very quickly, I put that aside and I keep going.
people don't even know how to go about getting to know themselves. How do you
Just
go about getting to know
reflect
yourself?
and be silent. Truly. I finished Queen's College, whenever year I did. And I remembered at the time we were studying for JAM and SSC. But at the same time, my parents had thought, you know what, maybe this might be an opportunity or a time for her to consider doing university in the US. And I know, unlike the rest of my colleagues, while they were studying SS and JAM, I had the extra, at the time, I considered it a burden to study for the SAT. And if anyone knows anything about the SAT, the way English in the US is very different from Queen's English. And having to orient myself to studying for an exam that no practice. You know, I remember common entrance, you would go to lesson after lesson after lesson. But SAT self-taught. I think I took it once. The score wasn't the highest, but in my head, I thought this score is not that bad for somebody who hasn't taken it, etc. Submitted my applications. And I think at the same time I found out I got into Unilag, I also found out that I got into my university. I was quite excited. Not quite sure the decision making, I can't remember, but I know that the decision was she'll go. So I definitely abandoned my Unilag journey, which quite frankly I was jealous because all my friends, or at least a lot of my friends, were going to Unilag, and I felt that all of a sudden I'm missing my cohort of friends and I'm going into a new space. But then again, once I had locked into this is my destination, I was gone. And I reframed my mind to this is the new journey, make new friends. It's cold weather because it was completely cold. I had to get used to a new environment. But then within a month or a month and a half, I was running. At some point, you're expected to do internships and find work study jobs. And I remembered knowing that I wanted to do investment banking, but my school was not in New York, and a lot of the investment banking options were in New York. I remembered having a friend of mine who also went to Queen's College and had done that program. And so I chatted with her. She gave me, A, B, C, D, E, which a lesson is you're not on an island. There are always people in your journey, wherever you travel, that can provide guidance. And I remembered applying for that job, but I had to go for an interview. And I think I had a car, but I'd never essentially orchestrated my trip to New York for this job interview. And I remembered getting into my car at 4 a.m, traveling maybe 3 hours with a lot of rain and snow. And I actually remember I almost had an accident that day because I ended up being brushed into the shoulder by a really large truck. And I know when that happened, I said to myself, is this a sign that I should just not even bother and just tow, another line? Why is it by force to apply for a job in New York? Anyway, got back on the road, got to the airport. I remember getting to New York, had no clue because I don't think I'd been to New York, or at least this particular location where the interview was. I got there, you line up. So there were a bunch of other young Black professionals, African, etc., that were lined up to do this job interview. And you literally go in, you interview for 5 minutes, and then you leave. And they let you know in the evening whether you got in or not. And I don't know how many job applications, but they get a lot. And I think they only accept about 100 in the investment banking program. And I ended up getting the news that I got in. And so again, back to this sort of story through career. I did that. I got into investment banking. I did that summer internship. And from there, I finished university, did a full-time stint in investment banking. Again, even through work, you realize that there are not so many people like you when you're in the office place. But again, the notion is no one should tell you what you can and can't do. And even when you can't do something, the question is, what do I need to do to be great at what I do? And I think that's really what tends to happen with me is even if I'm not as great as the next person, then it means that's what growth is all about. It means hunker down, learn the skills. It may not be as easy, and then come back at it. So anytime I'm going to pick where I need to be, it has to challenge me. It cannot be something where I come in on day one and I've knocked it out the park. I turned down to go back to investment banking and I faced consulting. So I did consulting for 10 years. All different kinds of projects, all different industries, all different countries. So whether it's from pharmaceutical to biotech to banking to Navy, meaning defense. And then at some point, I got the opportunity to come to Nigeria. And again, it was another challenge. I hadn't worked in Nigeria. I'm from Nigeria. There was a family decision to come and have the kids experience Nigeria. again, it was almost like you're stepping on a new train and not knowing what's on the new train. Because it's one thing to live in Nigeria, it's another thing to work in corporate Nigeria as a woman. It was and remains a psychological experiment. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Part of it is recognizing the different cultures and recognizing the diversity that exists, whether in Nigeria, in Europe, or anywhere else in the world. And based on societies and how they formed and evolved, there's always an adjustment that's required. In corporate America, there's less of a conversation, right? Because going through tertiary, and maybe there's a lot more awareness around, gender parity, gender equality. I'm not saying it doesn't show up because everybody brings their individual biases to the office place. But there are many policies, rules to protect certain elements, right? Or certain behaviors. And people being more conscious and aware in the workplace, I would say, from my experience in the US. Consulting investment banking is a bit different because everybody has almost a type A personality, right? Everybody is trying to get the next job or get the next deal or impress the client. So there was less room around, sort of, this person is less because she's a woman, etc. So I experienced that less. But when I came into corporate Nigeria, again, organizations have their rules and policies. So I was fortunate that the organization I was in was transforming. That's part of the reason why I joined the bank. And so a lot of it was trying to build best practices into the organization. But you could still see that, as an example, on the first day I walked into the building, and every organization is a microcosm of the society. But I remember walking to the elevator and there were two people in the elevator, and I happened to get in, and I think I had a backpack, and I had my handbag, and I said good morning. There was no response to my good morning, or maybe there was and I just didn't hear it. And then I happened to take the elevator all the way up, and then as I was getting off the elevator, I heard one of the gentlemen say to the other person something about, why didn't you greet her? She's one of the new ogas that they had hired. And the next day, I come into the same elevator, and I think at the time these were elevators where somebody is controlling the elevator button. So I come the next day and immediately says, good morning, ma. And I thought, wow, something changed overnight. Again, was it because I was carrying a backpack and I seemed like a young, youthful person, therefore not worthy of a good morning back? Or was it because I was a woman and therefore I didn't seem like I was an oga? And I think that's why I said it's a psychological experiment. It's not a good or a bad thing, but what the society gives you is what the society has learned and evolved. And the conversation I always have in my head is this an opportunity for me in the one time that I have with you to change that narrative so you think different? And there are different ways to say it. So sometimes I give that experience as a woman in corporate, and it's the same way. I can be in a meeting sometimes and I'm the boss, but somebody comes in and faces somebody else who they presume to be the boss. Did it happen to me in another life? No, but it's happened to me, sure enough, in Nigeria. But it's my opportunity to change the narrative. So the next time that person walks into a room and sees another woman or two women and there are four men, don't make the assumption, just ask. My husband and I go out many times, right, for dinner, brunch, whatever the case might be. I might decide that I'm the one that's going to put the money in the tip, etc. But when they open it, oh, thank you so much, sir. And my husband will say, I didn't put the tip. The person that put the tip is my wife. And it's always okay, thank you, ma. But it's almost, you can always see the disappointments, right? Or maybe not disappointment, but surprise. And that's why I use the word psychological experiment, because I have many stories. But I always say to myself, how do I use this opportunity to change the narrative? And that, to me, is the little steps we take at some point will make a difference. And I'm okay with those little steps.
Do you intentionally call out those behaviors and try to correct them?
Sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes when you let people self-acknowledge the missteps that they've made on their own. Otherwise, in calling it out only adds defense and takes away from the message that needs to be told.